Welcome to the show. Good to see you here another week. We'll be talking about our usual features. I'll have a guest later in the show. It'll be Jeremy McGraw from the law firm of Bordas and Bordas, my firm. We'll be talking about oil and gas rights and issues. But first, let's talk about our community champion of the week, and that person's also a lawyer, and that's Bill Ehlenfeld, the recently departed U.S. attorney here for the northern part of West Virginia. And Bill did a great job in that role. And I say that for a number of reasons. He represented the government with class, with professionalism, and as a gentleman, a lot like his dad, who's been a longtime attorney here in the Wheeling area. And his grandfather was, of course, very well known here in the area and a mayor back in the day. But Bill didn't just fight crime. He didn't just go after the drug dealers. In his position, Bill also went out into the schools and talked to teenagers about making good choices, sound choices with respect to not using drugs, with respect to what they do on social media, with respect to whether or not they're texting inappropriate things out there that could get them into trouble, and explain to them that not only is it wrong to do, but there are also criminal consequences as a result of those things. And Bill's now departed from that job and has returned to private practice, but he did a fantastic job over the many years that he was in that role as the United States Attorney. And so I want to give a shout out to him and congratulations to Bill for a job well done. He's the community champion this week on the Jamie Bordas Show. Bill Ehlenfeld. Next, the quote of the week. This is from our 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama. And I have not used a quote from President Obama, and I thought since he recently departed office that it'd be good to use a quote from him. And he said, "If you're walking down the right path and you're willing to keep walking, eventually you'll make progress." If you're walking down the right path, and I think that's important, the right path, and you're willing to keep walking, eventually you'll make progress. Barack Obama, 44th President of the United States of America. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because if you're doing the right thing, if you're living your life the right way, if you're going about your business the right way, and you keep on going down that path of doing things the right way, you will make progress eventually. Good things will happen. And the same is also true of the opposite. If you're going down the wrong path, you're on a collision course for bad things happening. So very important to look at that in that statement from President Obama, to know that you do things the right way, do them the way they should be done. You have a moral compass and guide with respect to what you're doing, and if you keep on doing those things and you go down that path, you will make progress in your life, you'll make progress in your business, you'll make progress in your family, whatever area that you may be looking at. So keep that in mind. So good quote from President Obama. Next, our legal tip, and that is this week. A nuisance claim is when a person or corporation's intentional or negligent conduct interferes with a person's right to enjoy and use his property. And, we think about this word nuisance, so-and-so is a nuisance, this is a nuisance, but it has a very specific meaning in the law where a person or corporation is behaving in such a manner that interferes with your ability to enjoy and use your property. And that could be through all kinds of ways. I mean, it could be, if you have a neighbor who is playing loud music at 4 in the morning every single night that's blaring and keeping you awake all night, that's a nuisance. The same could be true of corporations. If a corporation is engaging in conduct that prevents you from being able to enjoy your property in a proper way because of either whether it's an odor, a nauseous odor, or a noise, or through light, or whatever it may be that's interfering with your ability to enjoy your property, that is considered to be a nuisance under the law and something for which you can recover. And we'll be talking about that later in the show a little bit with my guest, Jeremy McGraw, today. But I want to talk about it a little bit here first, which is that one of the big things that we're seeing in that regard is in the oil and gas industry here in the local area, particularly with respect to so many people who have chosen to live out, so to speak, out of the city, out in the country, because they want that peaceful setting. They want that quiet enjoyment of their property. They want to be able to, hear the birds at night. They want to be able to hear the animals. They want to be able to hear the wind, whatever it may be. And instead what they're hearing is loud noises. They're getting smells. They're getting lights, etc. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about on the show here today. But I think it's first important for everybody to understand that nuisance is a particular term in the law. It's not just someone annoying you. I mean, hey, I don't like that my neighbor has, clothes hanging on the back of his house to dry them out at night. That's not a nuisance. I mean, your neighbor can hang clothes on the line unless there's some city ordinance preventing them from doing that or some other ordinance. That's not a nuisance. The nuisance are things that, you may not do it that way. That's not a nuisance. It's interfering with your ability to enjoy your property, not just because you don't like the way something's being done or don't like the looks of something, et cetera. You may think that your neighbor painting their house bright pink is an ugly color for a house. That's not a nuisance. It's the things that actually interfere with your ability to enjoy your property. So we'll talk about that more on the show. We need to take a break first. When I come back, I'll be speaking with Jeremy McGraw about oil and gas rights. Stay with us.
Start the new year with quality natural products from Danoon Lumber. 8-inch tongue and groove pine paneling, available in 8, 12, and 16-foot lengths. Now only 85 cents a linear foot. Live edge cherry, only $8.50 to $10 a board foot. Why not walnut? Walnut barn doors make any room even more stunning. As we always say, better grade, better selection, better price, better hurry. Danoon Lumber.
Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration has been restoring homes after disasters for nearly 4 decades. Through that experience, we present Panhandle Custom Homes, Kitchens, and Baths. We handle your entire project, from concept to completion, working with you every step of the way. From the budget-minded upgrade to a fully custom remodel, you can trust the Panhandle name. Panhandle Custom Homes, Kitchens, and Baths. Welcome home.
Welcome back to the show. Good to have you with us again here this week. My favorite part of each week's show, which is when I have a guest on, and this week my guest is Jeremy McGraw, a lawyer at my firm, Bordas & Bordas, and Jeremy's going to talk with us about oil and gas rights and issues, and he's actually become one of the leaders in the state of West Virginia on these topics on behalf of landowners. So, Jeremy, thanks for being with us here on the show today.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jamie, I'm very happy to be here.
Jeremy, this is something that obviously in the last 5-6 years or so has been very big here throughout the state of West Virginia, particularly here in the northern panhandle, and of course over in Ohio as well, and Pennsylvania, as the Marcellus shale play, the Utica shale plays have just been going like crazy. And there's been ups and downs in terms of the price of oil and gas that have affected those things. But one of the things that you've done is really become fully engulfed in these issues, and to the point where you've now been named by the Super Lawyers Organization as a rising star in the state of West Virginia with respect to issues relating to oil and gas. And that's quite an accomplishment, and something that, of course, I'm very proud of that you've done. But people may not understand all the issues that are out there right now. There's a lot of hot topics out there.
Yes, there are, Jamie. The oil and gas industry is changing all the time, and the issues that the landowners are facing are changing all the time. We've moved past a lot of the time where you were dealing with leasing and what should be in your lease, how your lease should be worded. We're now on to seeing the practical effects of how that lease language treats you now at this point that the royalties are supposed to be coming in. We're seeing the downturn in some of the economy and now a little bit of the upswing in the oil and gas industry, which changes what your rights are in terms of, is your lease going to be renewed? Are you going to get another chance to renegotiate those terms? Are you being paid what you're supposed to be paid under the agreement and under the law?
That's one of the big things that we've been seeing is that, people, or at least the companies, are now reapproaching the landowners because some of these leases are coming up and saying, I just need you to sign this to renew. And sometimes it's not such a good idea to sign to just renew.
That is absolutely correct. Now, a lot of times when the initial leases were signed, they were good for a set period of time, 3 years, 5 years, and there's different ways the gas companies could go about extending those leases. In many of those leases, it was just their option. They could decide to renew the lease just by sending you a certain amount of money, as long as they were living up to the other terms of their lease agreement. But there are certain people out there that did not have those terms in their leases, and they could actually be in a position to renegotiate some of their terms. You should always check out and make sure the gas companies have done what they were supposed to do in terms of extending your lease agreement. A lot of companies waited to the last minute because of the economy and how they were trying to figure out how to do things to determine whether or not a lease was going to be extended by a payment or whether they had done enough work to just extend your lease anyway. So there's a lot of things that need to be looked at. You need to be cognizant of the fact of whether or not the gas companies lived up to their end of the bargain as you move forward through the renewal process.
One of the things a lot of people hear are these terms like bonus and royalty thrown out there, and they think, well, what the heck does that even mean? What's a bonus? What's a royalty? And maybe that's good for people to know and understand. So maybe you could explain that a little bit, what those things are.
Yeah, what they've been calling a bonus is essentially a signing bonus, an amount of money that they pay you to get you to sign the agreement. Now, the leases used to provide for what was called a rental payment, and you would be paid every year during an oil and gas lease. So for hundreds of years, that's the way oil and gas leases worked. They would pay you a rental fee every year until they started the well. The new leases have been something called a paid-up oil and gas lease, or a paid-up bonus lease. And what they do is they pay you all those rental fees that they would normally pay you each year, but they pay it up front at the time you sign your lease, and they're calling that your bonus and your rental payments. So that's just an amount of money that you get for signing the lease and for the right for them to hold on to that lease for a set number of years without them really having to do anything to.
So when we hear somebody saying, I got $3,000 an acre, $4,000 an acre, whatever that may be, that's that type of payment that you're referring to?
That is exactly that type of payment that I'm referring to, yes.
All right, then you also hear this, percentage, that you're getting X percent royalty, whether it be, 14%, 16%, 18%, 20%, whatever it may be. People hear that as well. What's that equate to?
That is going to be you as the mineral owner's share of production once the oil and gas is actually being sold. So when the gas company finally gets the gas out of the ground, they're taking it to market, they're selling it, or they have contracts to sell it, they're getting paid a price for that gas. You as the landowner are entitled to a percentage of that under the oil and gas lease agreement. That is your royalty. So whatever percentage you were able to negotiate or was put in your lease, that is the percentage of the ultimate revenue from the oil and gas that you as the landowner should share in, and then the gas company keeps the other portion of that as their working interest.
One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that it may be important to have a lawyer take a look at this in almost every instance, because just because you may think, well, I'm getting X amount of dollars for the bonus payment, I'm getting X percent for the royalties, and that sounds pretty good because that's better than my neighbor did, or that's better than what I'm hearing people are getting. A lot of those things can depend upon the language in the agreement, particularly with respect to whether or not you get those royalties before or after costs and a whole host of other things. So people need to understand that as well.
Yes, they do, and that is really the hot topic right now. As wells are getting back into production again, as we're starting to see the checks come in, people are very concerned because they see one number and then they see a lot of deductions or things that they don't quite understand that are being subtracted from their lease payments. So in those situations, you may have had an 18% lease agreement to be paid 18% royalties, but by the time they start taking costs out, it may be more like you're getting paid 12, 13, 14%. And there's questions under the law about whether the gas companies can do that and how they go about doing that.
And that's one of the things that, when you're putting language in there, you want to look and see, do costs get taken out or not?
Exactly. Do you have a gross lease? Do you have a net lease? What costs might come out? How do they calculate them?
And, because of this, you mentioned that production's kind of up and running again in some places. I mean, one of the issues that we've seen is that there's periods of time where there is no production and things aren't happening, and what does that count for? Does that mean that sometimes there's been no production at all? So when that happens, do they have certain rights, or are their rights suspended? And there's a whole host of issues that come about in litigation because of that.
Yeah, the idea behind an oil and gas lease is that both parties are going to profit. They're going to sell their gas, you're going to make money, they're going to make money, everybody's going to be happy. If they're not selling gas and not paying you a royalty, they're at risk for losing their lease. So what the companies have done is they've inserted different types of language into their leases called shutting clauses, delay in marketing clauses, which purport to allow them to basically shut down wells, pay you much less than a royalty, perhaps only $5 an acre for a year to hold your property. But there's questions about whether or not they're being truthful in how they go about calculating that and deciding whether or not your well is capable of production, whether or not there is a market, and how they're treating you as the landowner fairly.
We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue talking about these issues with Jeremy McGraw. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
Well, I was the oldest of 9 children, so as a result of that, I grew up fighting battles for my brothers and sisters, and we grew up in some pretty tough neighborhoods. I saw juveniles and women being mistreated, and I thought that it would be a wonderful thing to be able to fight for people that were less fortunate and that couldn't fight for themselves. The thing that I enjoy still is helping people and fighting fights that other people sometimes weren't able to fight themselves.
Bordas and Bordas, fighting for justice.
Danoon Lumber is proud to be the sponsor of the Wheeling Chamber of Commerce Home and Garden Show, February 10th, 11th, and 12th at Westbanco Arena. Stop by their display and see for yourself the beauty and affordability of natural hardwood moldings and paneling. Denoon now also features quality Amish-made furniture, including rockers, tables, chairs, and benches. Better grade, better selection, better price. Denoon Lumber.
Welcome back to the show. I've been speaking with my guest here this week, Jeremy McGraw, lawyer at Bordas & Bordas, my firm. We're talking about oil and gas rights and issues. And Jeremy, we've been talking about some of the issues that are now coming up here with respect to the oil and gas now that there's actually gas coming out of the ground. And one of the things that's happening is some disputes arising about these, should costs be taken out or not. And these are things that are actually having to be litigated in the courts. And that's, one of the things that firms like ours that have litigated over the years, that's where we've been. We've not been quote unquote property lawyers over the course of the years dealing with property, but this oil and gas has created a whole new set of issues because so much more litigation has arisen out of it than just typical, hey, I'm selling a house to somebody. So now you take knowledge of someone like you with oil and gas and the litigation experience of our firm, and we're having to take on these issues. And what are some of the issues that are out there now that are having to be litigated?
Well, many of the issues that are popping up now, and certainly many of the issues that we're starting to litigate at this point in state and federal courts, is this issue of how they're calculating post-production cost from your royalty payment. So as I said before, you have a set percentage that you're supposed to be paid that's your share of the profits from the oil and gas. The general law in West Virginia had always been that the oil and gas company, the oil and gas producer, would pay all of those costs because they had a duty to market and sell your gas under their lease agreements. The law has allowed them to change that a little bit by trying to insert language in your leases about having you pay a share of the costs associated with getting that gas from the well to the place that it's sold, those gathering costs, transportation costs, processing costs, and how are those going to be calculated. The law is pretty specific in West Virginia about how gas companies need to go about having the right to take out those costs, and that they need to be very specific with the landowner up front about how they're going to do that, how it's going to be calculated, and what exactly is going to be taken out. So that's a lot of fertile ground there for dispute, because you can imagine these companies, they're wanting to make as much profit as they can, and there are millions of dollars at issue. And I'm afraid that some of the companies may be taking liberties with how they're calculating those costs and how they're treating their landowners.
The other issue that we're seeing with respect to these oil and gas issues are who actually has the mineral rights, because with respect to some pieces of property, there have been gas wells on them for decades, where they're called shallow wells, not going all the way down to the Marcellus and Utica shale, but just shallow wells to get gas out. And the question becomes, some of those particular wells had been dormant or not being utilized or not producing any gas for years. And the question is now, do those people that had been given those leases, those companies that have been given those shallow well leases, do they hold the rights to those minerals by production, is what it's referred to? Yeah,
Jamie, exactly right, held by production. There have been oil and gas leases in this area for 100 years. When I'm going back and doing title work to see who owns minerals, you see these leases and you see these severances going back all the way to the early 1900s. And you see some leases from the early 1900s that are still producing. There's still a well on that property. But you also see a lot of leases where there had been a well in the past. Maybe the company found it not profitable to operate for a while, so they let them run into disrepair for a bit, then they come in and they try and reopen them up. And what we've seen is there are a lot of these shallow wells that hold on to property by production. And what that means is once they drill that well and once they start selling gas, they hold that lease by production, meaning that lease will go on really until the well runs dry or they stop operating for oil and gas there in that area. The shallow companies that were holding on to these wells have done a lot of work to try and hold on to them as long as possible, because these companies are making a lot of money by transferring these existing, so-called existing, leases over to the newer companies that are going to drill the deep wells and get the Marcellus and the Utica gas.
And of course, one of the arguments that's being made by you and others is that, look, this was never what was intended. It wasn't intended to go down, thousands of feet into the earth to get gas out. Look, there was no gas being produced for all these years. You can't just say because I had this little well on this property to get this shallow well to get this gas out, and you haven't done it for all these years. Now you have the rights to negotiate with these deep well drillers, not the landowner.
You're exactly right. And when you look at deeds and when you look at leases, you're always trying to find out what the intent of the parties was. And a lot of times you can look at the words and just know from the meaning of the words what the parties intended. The problem is you go back into the early 1900s, and when a gas lease says all oil, all gas, well, that's all that they knew at that time, was that there was a well a couple hundred feet that they could drill into a sand to get some oil and gas out. They never anticipated that there was gas thousands of feet underground, or they never anticipated that we would ever have the technology to be able to get to that gas thousands of feet underground. So we don't believe it's fair or consistent with the intent of the parties that one of those leases from the early 1900s should be able to hold on and prevent the people who own the mineral rights today from profiting from the massive influx of the oil and gas operation today.
One of the things I talked about earlier in the show before you came on was about nuisance claims and how, that people have a right to freely enjoy their property, use their property without being the interference of others. And it's one of the things we're seeing now in the oil and gas industry is that some of these large corporations are putting, wells, and not just wells, but processing plants right next to the property of others. I don't, maybe oftentimes they don't even have a deal with this particular landowner, but they're putting a processing plant or something right next to their property that makes all kind of noise at night that's as big as 2 football fields. There are lights coming through. People can't even sleep at night because of all the noise and light and everything. And nuisance claims are being brought because of that.
Yes, actually, I represent dozens of individuals with those types of cases, and the problem is these people live out in the country. They never expected that there would be a factory or a massive processing plant built beside them. They wanted to be in the country, they wanted the quiet, they wanted to have the ambiance of being out there in the woods and loving that type of life. Unbeknownst to them, gas company comes in and builds these massive processing facilities, and people have seen the oil and gas wells, but I don't know if a lot of people have actually seen these processing facilities, these cryogenic deethanizers, these large factories which really process the gas that comes from the wells and put them down on the line, put them down further the line. These are massive facilities. They're massive industrial plants, similar to what you'd see in many places where there were steel mills and those types of things. But those were built in areas where it was zoned for that type of thing to happen. Where these gas companies are now building these large processing facilities, there haven't been traditional zoning requirements that limit what they can and can't do, and they're really affecting the neighbors. You've got people who work shift work are now being kept up all night long because of loud noises, loud explosions, loud flares, dust and debris on their property all hours and days of the night, and it's causing them a lot of concern about where they live, what they expected their life to be like for the next 30 years as they retired or enjoyed their property, or what their property is going to be worth if, gosh forbid, they have to sell their land at some point.
And a lot of these people are older folks that want to peacefully enjoy retirement, and they're not getting to do that.
That's exactly right, Jamie.
Well, Jeremy, thanks for being here on the show. Hopefully people have a better understanding of some of these issues that are hot right now in the oil and gas industry here in the region. And congratulations, you were recently named a Rising Star by Super Lawyers. A great honor, and continue to do good work.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Hard to believe. It'll be 10 years this fall that I've been with the firm. So.
It's been good to have you here, to come up here from southern West Virginia with your wife being from Moundsville, to have you here in this area. So.
Thank you.
We need to take a break. When we come back, I'll be talking sports. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
It's time again for the Tri-State Home and Garden Show, March 3rd, 4th, and 5th at the Florian Center in Wintersville. Showcase your products and services to thousands of potential customers. Contact Rob Van Dyne or Brandy Wallagura at Wheelhouse Creative to reserve your booth today.
Start the new year with quality natural products from Danoon Lumber. 8-inch tongue and groove pine paneling, available in 8, 12, and 16-foot lengths. Now only 85 cents a linear foot. Live edge cherry, only $8.50 to $10 a board foot. Why not walnut? Walnut barn doors make any room even more stunning. As we always say, better grade, better selection, better price, better hurry. Danoon Lumber.
It's time again for the Tri-State Home and Garden Show, March 3rd, 4th, and 5th at the Florian Center in Wintersville. Showcase your products and services to thousands of potential customers. Contact Rob Van Dyne or Brandy Wallagura at Wheelhouse Creative to reserve your booth today.
Welcome back to the show. It's time to talk sports, and this week a little bit different. Instead of talking about what's going on in the world of professional or college or high school sports, I want to talk about youth sports a little bit this week. I have kids of my own, have seen them involved in sports. I played sports all growing up, and I think that sports teach you a lot about life. They prepare you for hard work. They prepare you to be dedicated to something. They teach you about teamwork, a whole host of values, and it's one of the reasons that I've been involved with youth sports so much over the years, or for these reasons, that I think it's extremely important for kids and their development, their growth, and becoming adults to learn the core values and principles that we want to live by each and every day. And some of these things are going on right now in the local area. For example, WAHA, the Wheeling Amateur Hockey Association that I was a part of. I played for 6 years growing up, and seeing kids still skating out there at Wheeling Park and being so involved in it, and getting out there in the cold air on Saturday and Sunday mornings and throughout the week is a great organization. One of the big things we have going for us here in the Wheeling area are so many good youth programs, and that's just one of them. But also, of course, WASA, the Wheeling Area Soccer Association, will be kicking off the spring season before too long. And one of the great things about the soccer organization is if you even go up and watch the kiddie kick up at the fields at Ogleby, you've got just dozens of games going on. You've got kids from age 3 years old on up, and they're out there running around, having a good time, getting exercise, burning off some energy. Just really good competition. But I think it's for a lot of kids, it's their first introduction to sports is the kiddie kick program. And you watch the parents, almost every single one of them out there, is out there really trying to have a good time with these kids. They play different games beforehand when they're practicing, and try to get them to have smiles on their faces. And that's the main thing you want from sports, is these kids to be smiling. So that's another great program. And then also, of course, Little League Baseball and Softball will be here before we know it as the weather turns. And the great organizations with Mountaineer Baseball and Softball here in the area. So many different kids involved in that, and the parents seem to really get animated with respect to baseball and softball. You kind of hear the fans more than you do maybe any other sport, but a lot of fun. I've coached my kids and the teams that they're involved with. My wife Stacy has coached, and we really always enjoy seeing those kids. You see a kid get that big hit that maybe hasn't gotten a big hit all year. You see a kid make a catch for the first time, and the smile on their faces, how they're jumping up and down with the ball in their hand. That's what it's all about. So I encourage you, get kids involved in these programs. You won't regret it. But you want them to have good exercise, but learning those principles. And the YMCA is something I'm very closely involved with. I've been on the board for a number of years, been president the last handful of years here at the local Y. And there are so many good things going on at the YMCA with respect to not only just the activities and the things you can do there in general, but also the programs there. Adam Shinsky and his staff do such a fantastic job, and you can do swimming, you can do basketball, you can do baseball, you can do workouts, there's just a whole host of things. They're doing lacrosse now. And check out the Wheeling YMCA, go to the website, stop out there, ask questions, get the brochures that are on the wall there, the flyers about the different programs that are coming up. There's something for everyone, literally. And it's a great place for kids to be. It's a safe place for kids to be. It's something where they can have smiles on their faces. I grew up around the YMCA, and I'm happy that my kids are now doing the same. So check out the Wheeling YMCA if you have a chance to do that, and look at all the things that are there to offer. I think you won't regret it. Thanks for being with us again here this week on the show. We'll see you next week on the Jamie Bordas Show.